All right, colleagues, it's past. Let us. Angithi masenifuna ukuhamba ngeke nithi ninakhona nizothi ngqo. So right, can we get usisintombi? All right, colleagues. Minister, we are very competent with service delivery this side. Provision of water for yourselves. Are you sorted? That side? So I just want to make sure that you are sorted. All right, that being the case, right, all right, colleagues, let's get going. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you, colleagues, this morning. We do somehow on our side of a depleted house. The AG is also presenting the outcomes of the MFMA this morning. So some colleagues are that side. But we are here to interact and engage with yourselves. I think before we start, Minister, you've got a new board. So maybe if we can take introductions first on your side, and then I'll just present a few issues for context, and then we will go to your presentation. On the far end there is the Honorable Begi Hadebe with an H. Next to him is the Honorable Lis, also known as Mazamban. And then next to him is the Honorable Mente. And then next to her is the Honorable Van Minen. And then next to her is the Honorable Zibula. And then we've got the apology of Honorable Somyo and Honorable Bucas this morning. My name is Mkhuleko Hlengwe and I chair the committee. So we'll hand over to you, Minister, for the introductions of the board, and then I'll make one or two comments, and then you can make your opening remarks, and then we'll go to your presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members, for the opportunity to interface with you on the state of SABC as per the question you placed before us on the annual report of 2021-22, which we'll all understand that it precedes 2022-23. I'm going to ask the chairperson of the board to introduce his team. Chairman of the board is very young, Kato Ramukomba, and I'll ask him to introduce the board. And from the department is only the DDG, Ms. Manzini. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Minister, and good morning, Honorable Chair and Honorable members. We
just want Minister your mic, and then Chairperson, please pull it closer to you.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and Honorable members, and through you, Minister. We did not bring the full complement of the board to this meeting. In the board, we only brought Ms. Pali Sakadi, who is next to me here. She is chairing the committee of the board on audit and risk. So we thought that for this engagement, she would be the most appropriate in the board. But I do, however, have the management team with me, led by the GCEO, Madoda, and the GCFO, Yolandi. We also have Advocate Vanara, the head of legal, and of GCOO as well, Ian Plakis, and Pumzile from SCM. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Just one
Honorable Chair.
second, Mr. I'll give you a moment now. I just wanted to know who we're dealing with. To the board chair and your colleagues, welcome. And we wish you well in this onerous task at the SABC. We've been there, and I'm pretty certain before this term ends, the committee will return so that we can do a proper close-up report on relevant matters of the SABC. Because in the 5th Parliament Legacy Report, you were a feature, and quite clearly in this term, whilst there may be improvements here and there, you still remain a feature of the work of this committee. So do expect us to drop by soon. It's good to see you, Advocate Vanara. It's been a while. So, Chair, it's to say that overall, the SABC maintained a qualified audit opinion for 21-22 with a qualification on irregular expenditure. The 21-22 annual report indicates that you suffered a loss of 201 million rands in the year under review, of course, which is relative to the 530 million rands recorded in 2020-21. Amongst other factors, the AG raised issues around material uncertainty that may cast significant doubt on the entity's ability to continue as a going concern. The SABC recorded a positive net asset position. However, the cash flows from operating activities were negative and the cash reserves were low. Irregular expenditure as well as fruitless and wasteful expenditure remain a challenge for the SABC, with an accumulated balance of 2.9 billion rands and 150 million rands incurred in the 21-22 financial year. It's worth noting that on 2 occasions we have had to adjourn our meetings with the SABC wherein the audit outcomes would have been discussed, with the specific focus, which of course is therefore for today, on irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure as well as investigations. I raise this because it speaks to the material challenges which have characterized governance at the SABC, and say that on the 23rd of November, we were compelled to adjourn our meeting with the SABC due to the Broadcasters Board as an accounting authority following the end of the previous term's board on the 15th of October. There was uncertainty about the delegated responsibilities then, and on the second occasion, on the 1st of March, the committee again was compelled to adjourn the hearing due to the vagueness around the designation of the Group Chief Executive Officer as the accounting authority. As already been noted, on the 18th of April, of course, the President then appointed the board. So that background just contextualizes why we've had the postponements and why we insist on these meetings, because of the issues that the AG has actually pointed out. So the irregular expenditure has already been indicated as 2.9 billion rands compared to the 5.4 of the previous financial year, and the irregular expenditure awaiting condemnation, subject to further investigation, increased marginally by 1.5% in the 2021 audit. So there's quite a number of issues that the AG has raised, and that is why you are a permanent feature of our work. And our expectation is, Mr. Chairperson, at the outset, you need to right these wrongs. We expect nothing more and nothing less as this committee. in all the issues that you have before you, whatever mandate and targets you have in the APP, and whatever you'll be doing in the BRRR report in October. It is our fundamental expectation that there is a renewed focus on an audit turnaround plan. These matters are long overdue. It's becoming a revolving door and, simply put, unacceptable. So we thought we should frame it early on in your term that the financial management issues continue to be of concern to us. So can I hand over to the Minister for his opening remarks, and then we will take the presentation, and then you will field questions. Minister, over to you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think to a greater extent you have made my opening remarks a bit easier, and you have shortened them very significantly. So I will avoid redundancy. So by ensuring that what are going to be the areas of focus, that is also covered in your letter. But I thought I wanted to say that one appreciates this opportunity to be part of this process, because it's not just an SABC process, it's also the mother body, which is the department, because we are here, we are companions, and each of us with a particular responsibility. I thought it is important to say we are aware, Chairperson, as the department, with regard to a lot of issues that must be resolved to improve the work of SABC. Whether it is legislation, policy, which currently appears at face value to be the main contributor in the difficulties of the space where SABC is operating. I guess last night we were able to agree, of course, as we intervene, the truth and facts will demonstrate themselves, that probably out of 120 actions they were supposed to carry in, as far as 120 actions were supposed to be done, having done 105, the 15 seems to be the major contributor, the one that is outstanding, and which greater part of it is outside their control. We were able to say roughly, I was saying to them, if we were to say this is a list of factors which constitute an Achilles heel in your work, legislation and policy, what percentage would it be? We roughly, of course, it still has to be calculated, so no less than 50% of that contributes to this environment. And of course, releasing the spectrum, we said it's about 15%, which must be done. In other words, if the SABC Amendment Bill, Chair, is implemented, we hope it deals with 50% of the Achilles heel. And then we hope in a short space of time, which I think we are going to do, when we release the spectrum, there is a material, it's material that they need more channels to do a lot of things they are not able to do with the current channels they have. And of course, with the natural efficiencies that come with the digital protocol environment. So I thought it is important up front to say we make that commitment to deal with that environment, so that when they have to account, that is not an excuse as we go forward. But having said that, I am clear, you've said it in your words, Chair, that this is 2021-22, and in October we'll begin with 2022-2023. They will be responding to those in the context of the turnaround plan they are implementing. Having said all that, Chair, I'll leave it with you, Chairperson, so that you can guide presentations. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. Mr. Chairperson, over to you.
No, thank you very much. I think, Chair, you have contextualized what we can term the problem statement. And these are issues that as the board, we accepted that we inherit the good and the bad, and we have to hit the ground running. Also noted progress that is being made, appreciating that a lot of more work needs to be done. The numbers that you have articulated in relation to the journey towards reducing the losses, the journey towards reducing the regular expenditures and so forth. I think the focus then needs to be on closing it, concluding the investigations so that the SABC can equally be freed to focus on the mandate that it is tasked with. So I think with that, I would hand over to the GCO and the GCFO, who will then take the committee through the details of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. CEO and the CFO, laba abala ekhaya, so bazi kahle ukuthi senzani. Don't worry, they are part of us. They know this. So CEO and CFO will hand over to yourselves. Sure.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honorable members. We'll take you through this presentation. You may recall that we tabled this in Parliament on the 3rd of October 2022. And I'll just give highlights before Yolandi can get into it. The premise of our strategy is to accelerate revenue generation. And you will see from the financials that over a 4-year period financially, we moved from net losses that were just over R1 billion, and year on year we have been reducing those with the aim to break even and then move to profitability. Hence, we have moved from over R1 billion, and in 2022 we hit 201 million. That net loss, it improved by just over 329, and in percentage terms it represents 62% compared to fiscal year 2021. And I do think that we need to highlight the fact that revenue grew by about 90 million during that year. And we also saw marginal increase from a sponsorship revenue point of view. However, the increase, the 90 million revenue increase was impacted by the need to acquire sports rights. And in this case, if you recall, it was the Olympics. That was about 122 million rands. One of the things we've always highlighted is the negative impact of the public mandate whilst we are pursuing the commercial, because annually we have to spend just over 2.4 billion towards the fulfillment of the public mandate. Essentially, if we had not met that public mandate obligation of acquiring those sports rights, the operating position would have resulted in a loss of about 78 million, which would have been an 85% improvement. I do think the other thing that we'll highlight as Yolandi present here is the fact that we have also seen improvement when it comes to irregular expenditure. 2017, we moved from just close to 700 million. And at the end of financial year 2022, we're standing at 91 million. Same when it comes to fruitless and wasteful expenditure. There has been progressive improvements. One of the things that we'll talk to Chairperson is the area of going concern, which we're continuing to monitor, and we're putting plans in place from a revenue generation point of view so that we can mitigate this. So I would really like to pause at that and then just ask Yolandi to give a high level of the slides that we have prepared before we get into Q&A. Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, are you fine? All right, let's take the presentation. Over to you, CFO.
Good morning, Honourable Chair and members, the Minister, my board chair and other colleagues. Chair, with your permission, I would just maybe like to test with you my approach in the presentation and how much time I will have. We did put together a pack, I'll briefly put it on, that consists of a variety of documentation. Given that we have had 2 times here that we were trying to present and a year later, We preface the presentation with an executive summary on themes and progress on summaries of consequence management. Then there's the annual results presentation, and then there's a host of supplementary information. How much time would you allow me, Chair, and how much detail do you want me to go into so that I can just manage that with your permission? Thank you very much, Chair.
Point you will just let me know, but I think because so that we can round up on these issues properly coming into the next audit review. So I think deal with them, and then if you need more time, you'll indicate.
Thank you. So this presentation we prepared for our AGM last year. It sets the scene in terms of mandate and delivery, the progress on strategic outcomes, and the other themes that you see on the table there on the screen. And then we will focus a bit more on the annual results itself, and we round up on some analysis on fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So in short, on mandate delivery, we continue to reach in that year on average 25 million South Africans in a typical month. Our radio dominance continues 73%, and we have a host of other channels that supports the voice of the public broadcaster. I will move past the executive summary. The GCO touched on that. In terms of our pillars, financial sustainability in particular, in the year under review, we used another 200 million of the bailout fund. As we sit here, there's a little bit more than 200 million left so far. It's mostly focused on capital and a little bit left for content. We have not had any borrowings. We do not have any borrowing facilities, so we purely operate our organization on operational cash. On a competitive and innovative multi-channel platform, as much as COVID continued to impact some initiatives in the early part of that financial year, we continue to excel with public service announcement, our education channels, etc. The competitive workforce that year, April 2021, we start with the rollout of our new target operating model and post the Section 189 process. We do, however, enter the year with a significant number of vacancies. We have made appointments, but the vacancies also allowed internal individuals to look for promotional opportunities. So we end the year with 414 appointments from both internal and external. We continue to invest in bursaries, etc. As far as governance, risk management and others are concerned, our internal audit department have always excelled. They continue to do so in general, meeting external assessment requirements, and the progress against the audit plan, the internal audit plan, is good. I'll talk a bit more about our external audit opinion a little bit later. And last but not least, in terms of partnerships, in that year, April 2021, we partnered with Telkom. We launched the Telkom One streaming platform and a few other initiatives in the local content environment starts to yield benefits. Social responsibility, there's a host of initiatives that's captured here that we continue to invest our time and energies in and do what the public broadcaster is mandated for. We also, as is usual, achieve a number of awards in all our platforms, news, current affairs, television and radio, continue to bring the medals, if you will, home. On our predetermined objectives, that year we scored 51% on our scorecard, of which financial sustainability and content and platforms both are well achieved with greens. We have an amber in partnerships, and then governance, HR and digital are red. The underlying theme to an extent in that year is the startup in supply chain that is slow. The team was left depleted following the Section 189 process. We supplement them from about November, October in that year, and since then things start to gain momentum, but unfortunately did still have an impact in the technology environment, specifically to a lesser extent in human resources. In that year on human resources, we roll out an automated performance management system. It has since become embedded in the organization. And in the 2023 year, our performance contracting for the year was at 95% around 6 months into the year. So that process is now well embedded as well. Policy review, we have 134 policies that we started reviewing systematically, cleaning up as well. We progress to an extent on it. Some of the policies were up to 10, 15 years old, but it's not yet where we would have wanted it to be. And as we are concluding 2021 audit findings, that year audit conclusion was delayed, so we were a little bit behind there, but we've since caught up and we now achieve upwards of 95% on the resolution of audit findings. Moving on to turnaround plan implementation, at the time we were at 96%. The majority of the items that remain unattended to or not yet yielding benefits were the policy and regulatory initiatives. There were about 5 or so other initiatives or activities on our plan that we discontinue because they may no longer be relevant, but that is the percentage where we then stand in March 2022 with a little bit of an analysis on the different pillars and their various statuses. Going into financial performance, the organization continues its trajectory towards reducing its losses. Unfortunately, the expenditure do continue to exceed the income. And I will not repeat what the GCO has said. This specific slide just illustrates how we have managed to reduce the losses from 2018 to the year under review. And some of the information, television licenses improved slightly as the recovery in the economy start at that point in time. If you look at it today, unfortunately 2023 was not a good year for television licenses. Our audiences are affected by the variety of external circumstances that our country is confronted with. If you look at the revenue streams, this is a little bit of analysis on that. Maybe the most important one will be television licenses, where we continue to bill 4.4 billion rand, but with an evasion rate of about 82%. The collections are nearer to about 8 to 900 million. And despite all the initiatives that we have in this respect. On this slide, you can also just see how our audience ratings in prime time in particular have consistently declined over the years. In the current financial year, 2023, we managed to stabilize the audience ratings a little bit, but we've been struggling to get them anywhere near the kind of performance that we had seen in previous years. On expenditure, with the intervention on payroll, our single biggest expense line that concluded in March 2021. The payroll managed to reduce, but we do sit with the vacancies at that point in time, and unfortunately also an item that the AG raised. The vacancy rate struggles to get beyond about 18%, even 2 years later, and it does impact on everything from control, your internal control environment, to an extent some of our revenue generation initiatives, etc. It is a problem, and a variety of reasons for that. Content investment increased a little bit, which is positive after all the years. What we are managing to do that year, the new GE is now fully on board. He had restructured his department. There's new engagements with production houses, etc. That's taken place. We refreshed the reputation in that perspective. We also top up his top structure with the right skills, and we are therefore able to invest a little bit more. Which is good. We also start to implement models that allows us to invest what the financial world will call intelligently. So it's not just throwing money after the topic, it's cleverly investing in it, and those kind of initiatives start. Concurrently, we discontinue loss-making properties. We assess the performance on all our other properties to make faster decisions to exit out of properties that are not performing. The other biggest cost line is the signal and distribution cost. Initiatives starting that year. It is still ongoing to engage with our main service provider here to get what we will believe to be a competitive rate for the signal and distribution cost. The discussions around that are ongoing. In that year, it therefore remains a little bit flat. And then all other OPEX in general would be the fourth biggest cost driver in total, and various cost containment initiatives continue. But by then, we are also in what I will call a cost discipline mode. We have weeded out a lot of the bad behavior and ill discipline from the past, and being conscious of the costs we incur now becomes ops normal. Maybe just to note, the organization do have 87% of its cost are fixed. On the 4 main items, you get a sense of what I was referring to. And therefore, it means that we are what the finance people will call we're operationally geared. So when you are struggling to manage cash, it is a problem because you have very fixed line items that doesn't allow you a lot of opportunity to move. We talk about the cost of our public mandate, the unfunded mandate. Before even accounting for operational or signal and distribution and other overheads is between 700 and 800 million in a year, depending on the nature of the investments. But if you add signal and distribution costs and other overheads, the cost of unfunded mandate quickly climbs to about 2 billion on average a year. Some ratios, just for interest sake, unfortunately, a lot of the trends are not necessarily what you would want to see. The trend lines goes in the wrong direction. You want it to go up towards the right. We end the year with a cash balance of 1.1 billion, of which at that time 900 million relates to the recapitalization fund. And a year later, we have just a little bit over 200 million left of the recapitalization. I won't stop at the rest. I will not stop at the outlook either. And then get to your particular areas of interest. We have managed to reduce the overall opening balance, as you can see on the graph on the left-hand side. We have also, now in the graph at the middle, for the 6th year in a row, managed to reduce the number of in-year or the IE reported in a year. That is often not only in-year instances, but it's also instances from prior years that continue. If you have multi-year contracts, we have a few of those, which we may be engaging with you on later. And then as we were busy cleaning up the register, which was the main reason for our qualification that remains after 5 years, you do then end up finding irregular expenditure from prior years, but you identify it in the current year as you're busy with that cleanup activity. So the 91 would have been the ongoing irregular expenditure in the year, but you will see the AG also speaks to another 41 million or so, which is identified in the year, but for prior years, and it relates to us cleaning up the irregular expenditure register. The opening balance is the reason for the qualification. So we did manage in this financial year to give the AG comfort that our procedures are sufficient to ensure that we test our full vendor payment cycle for IE in a year. Their concern remains with the balance as at 1 April 2020. And in particular, in this financial year, the period, in fact, before 2018. The organization chose to just focus, when it started to interrogate its vendor population for IE, we started focusing from 1 April 2018 onwards. As I sit here today, we have concluded 100% review of about 17 billion rands worth of payments from 1 April 2018 onwards. And those activities are now in the investigation, condonation, consequence management, and the write-off processes in a variety of stages. And towards the end of the last calendar year, and that is before the new Treasury instruction note that was issued in January 2023, our focus then shifts to the period pre-2018, in fact going as far back as 2012. And we were in consultation with the AG working on developing a process that will allow us to also test all the total vendor population for that period, going back nearly another 6 years. We continue to implement a number of initiatives to strengthen the way business engage in supply chain activities, as well as the general planning that takes place in business and general internal controls. So in this year, we had already reviewed the supply chain policy and SOP twice. We continue to benefit from the engagement with National Treasury and use those initiatives to strengthen and enhance our processes. Our SCM governance office that was established in 2019 is fully functional, albeit with about 50% of capacity, and you see the theme later on when we are struggling to make headway in investigations is because we are struggling with capacity issues there for a number of reasons. We also take a much more rigid approach to indications that business wants to or perpetrates irregular expenditure, and we issue frameworks around that, guidance around what will happen. The consequence management guidance takes place. Its connection with our disciplinary policy is clearly established. We have a fully functional loss control committee that presides over all requests for condonation before it goes to National Treasury, or should they reject it, then the Loss Control Committee take the comments made from National Treasury, review the instance, strengthen the motivation, speak to specifically the National Treasury comments, and then it is presented to the board for write-off. So we develop a bunch of checklists. We enhance from the previous consequence management, and i.e. also who reviews what and who's responsible for what, so that you don't have some of the multi-year contracts and what led to them being, i.e. being repeated. And we therefore continue to strengthen the internal control environment. The one specific matter that remains a block around our ball and chain around our leg, though, is the fact that we struggle to get a permanent head of supply chain. In this year, in about November, we have a candidate that joins. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, she resigns about 4 months later. The head of supply chain you see accompanying us today has been with the organization since June last year, and you can see the difference the stability in leadership makes. So the themes, incorrect evaluation applied in bids, a large number, and I will spend a bit of time on this, Chair, so that we can have the robust engagement later. Speaks to the main contributor to that is by now in our world, in any case, the infamous Mafoko security contract goes back to 2016-17. The subject of an SIU investigation. They issue their report, we join them, committed to implementing all the activities that is required, the recommendations from that. It sits at the tribunal in May last year. We are still awaiting the outcome from the tribunal. We do follow up on a regular basis, though, and we will implement when the final judgment comes. The contract is also declared a material irregularity by the AG. They report on it. We brief them at least on a quarterly basis in year on the status, and particularly if there's a status change, we tell them about that. To this day, unfortunately, I don't believe there's yet been any notable movement, and the SIU will probably also be able to comment on it. So that's the single biggest one that contributes towards the 40 million. Then the subcontracting not for a contract that was above 30 million. That's another one that comes from the 2019 and 2020 financial years, identified by the AG at that point in time. In this case, and we can rather go into the detail later if you wanted to, but this specific matter was then also condoned by National Treasury, based on how the consequence management took place and the initiatives, the remedial actions that we had implemented. But it's a multi-year contract. It will run for another 2 years. Of course, with the new Treasury instruction note, you are no longer required to report on condoned IE. So there's now a little bit of a disjuncture when you want to talk about comparable like-for-like information. And similarly, of course, we're now no longer required to report on the opening balance. We report on the in-year instances. Payments without contracts is a theme. There's a few of them. We can speak more about it a little bit later. But this is a practice that we find here in 2018. It was discontinued as a accepted practice about 2 years ago. So the ones you see here are very specific circumstances that informs them. Today, any intention to make payments without a contract in place must be accompanied by who is responsible and what were the consequence management that was applied. So we are quite strict with it. Schedule All is a system that's been in place in the technology division since about 2010. It operates entirely outside supply chain. It is mainly focused on the logistical services, etc., around outside broadcasts. The specific system, the supply chain module, is discontinued in April 2022. So as of May 2022, the supply chain activities takes place under the supply chain umbrella, and the internal control and policies and SOPs of supply chain. It is literally 100 to 1,000 little items. You see them in the register. It's easily about 2/3 of the register are these little items. We are also looking at presenting that for condonation as a bulk, because there's too many individuals involved and it goes back so far. So we have been in consultation with the AG and also with National Treasury on how you deal with that specific theme when you want to condone it and or ultimately write it off. Procurement process is not followed. There's a few items under that. Some of it is really just a negligence. Others would have a variety of reasons, and we can engage on them when we talk a bit more detail. We like to, or certainly I like to, interrogate the trends and the messages I observe in IE and Fruitless and Wasteful over a period to see if what we're doing is making a difference. So I would look at the top 10 contributors, and if the percentage grows and it's multi-year contracts, it gives you a sense that the behavior in the organization has started to turn the corner. And secondly, if the majority of the IE relates to prior year instances, is also an indication to me that we are making progress. So in this case, this year, 72% of the IE relates to the top 10 service providers, which would be the Mafokus, that 30 million subcontracting, and a few other of security contracts that we will talk about surely later. And about 23% only relates to instances in year, of which that Schedule All one, for example, will contribute. Moving towards Fruitless and Wasteful, a little bit of a different conversation. Firstly, you don't engage with National Treasury on this, and this is a real topic that you actually want to be at a zero, but there are a few themes that continue to express itself, and we will talk about that. It can also be just one instance and your balance goes up. We do have an obligation to recover to the extent that is possible, and of course consequence management goes without saying. So at least we managed to reduce the overall balance, and we also managed to reduce the in-year trends. You have a few themes. Particularly the impairment of content. This is when you don't broadcast something by a specific license expiry date, for example, or you just don't broadcast something. There's sports and there's general VE content that's affected by this. We normally pick it up when we do an inventory towards the end of a calendar year. With respect to this particular theme, the consequence management have already been applied on one of the video entertainment initiatives. The sports one, and our sports department has a reputation in this respect, has been combined with the 2023 sports content that expired, and that disciplinary process is currently ongoing. Something like travel cancellation, it's absolutely not acceptable. We do proceed with the recoveries of that and or disciplinary action, probably a combination of both, but the recoveries on that is a fairly embedded process by now. Then we have the rental on the unoccupied office space. Also a topic that features in the AG report, and a bit of background for your information. Contract signed for our Mbombela premises in 2016-17, or it was then renewed. The relationships comes from 5 years before that. It is renewed with a vacant space in it. There were plans at the time. The plans are never executed. And we continue to pay for this vacant space, which is then why you see this rental of unoccupied space. Since then, it is also part of the SIU investigations, their proclamation. Again, they've concluded their recommendation report. It has been presented at the tribunal. We have been waiting for that judgment since about October last year. We have in the meantime exited that specific relationship. We are now in a new relationship following a regular process, have been subject to audit already, and that relationship has been in place since April last year. In the meantime, we are, in any case, as an organization, considering where to, when we conclude this 5-year lease agreement, and those discussions continue. As soon as the tribunal issues their judgment, we will proceed with the 6 million rand that was at a point in time and those recoveries. The total amount spent on that space, however, is nearer to 10 million rand, and we will deal with that as when we get the judgment from the tribunal. So the AG also flagged this as a material irregularity, and similar to Mafoko, we keep them abreast of any developments. I didn't mention it when I spoke about Mafoko, but the Mafoko relationship has also since ended in May last year. We followed a new regular supply chain process, and a new service provider then joins the organization, where we have no reason to believe that there are any irregularities in that relationship. So again, we have exited that relationship. Fraudulent payments and other, a combination of things, and then we get to interest, interest on a variety of things, repeat fees, municipalities, Telkom are the main themes that drive that. So with repeat fees, this is a directive issued in 2007, where the organization says that we will pay interest on all invoices that's older than 30 days, even regardless of when it is submitted. So it's literally from the date of an invoice. And as a result of a combination of factors, we are poor in the execution of that process, and we find ourselves with interest on the repeat fees. However, in the past 2 years, a few things has happened. One, we have started a process to repeal that directive, and the process of engagement with our stakeholders, particularly the creative industry, is going to start soon. We need shareholder assistance with this because it is a public process, so at least that process starts. We put in place an SOP. We automate the process on our ERP system. The SOP permits the business unit to take disciplinary action against the department should they not proceed with the processing, so those things are in place. So jump forward a year later, today as we sit here, instances of interest on repeat fees have reduced by as much as 85%. Then you get to municipalities. Now, a variety of factors sees the fruitless and wasteful on municipalities. Chair, I'm watching the time, but you might want to interrupt me when I carry on too long. Municipalities, we firstly, they issue their invoices, as I'm sure all of us know, in our private capacity at different times of a month. The SABC typically do one payment run at the end of the month, and then that you have the combination of the two entities and their internal challenges. What we have done over about an 18-month period, and today, as I sit here, we've concluded those engagements. We firstly engage with the municipalities to align, to the extent possible, their invoice date with our payment date. We issue an instruction internally that payments for municipalities are prioritized and they get paid regardless of where in a month we are. We issue an instruction to the individuals internally. That's part of that process, that now that we've put these measures in place, should you not process when you are supposed to process, consequence management follows immediately. We've got a zero tolerance. The last two that remains, and you'll see it in the summary, the big amounts in any event is Mangaung and Northwest, Mahikeng, and those two municipalities in the last 6 weeks agreed to work with us, and they will write off interest going back as far as, I think, 2014, and if we can prove that we've paid, which we believe we will be able to do. So we are hopeful that by now, a year post this reporting date, that we have done sufficient to address this theme, and that consequence management and or recovery will simply follow immediately right now. Then there's Telkom. Now, the reason for the Telkom interest is the outside broadcast that would take place over a year, and for each of these we would book, in those days it was literally separate copper lines. Today, not as I sit here, not only is the technology no longer necessary in all or it's not available for that matter, we do engage in outside broadcast with different technologies. Firstly, we developed an SOP once again. We automate the process in SAP. so that the booking of these lines are now controlled and you are able to match a line that's booked better with the invoice when it comes. We also engage with Telkom Corporate to formalize this process. So we have made significant progress in also reducing that specific theme of interest, and by now, if an individual is negligent in the organization, there will be limited patience for something like that. So getting to the audit outcomes, from 2015-16 and the 2016-17 year, with a lots of reds that results in the qualification, we are now left with one, which is the completeness of the IE register pre-2020, and I have touched on the initiatives made in that respect. You do, however, moving on to the AG report specifically and the briefing that I did to yourselves, there are 6 findings that also contribute or are what we call Annexure A findings. They are very significant findings that require immediate intervention. The IE completeness results in the qualification. Together with that goes consequence management and the investigations. They express concern in the pace of and who we hold responsible. They focus it in referring specifically to some officials, and particularly in the total population from 2012 that we do not yet or are still in the process of identifying and applying consequence management to. But these are important themes, so they raise it in those Annexure A findings. They raise comments around 2 of our predetermined objectives, where we are unable to provide them with information. The one relates to a scheduling system that we had to cancel the first procurement process for. That system would have allowed us to measure new content being broadcast. As I say, the system had to be, the supply chain process had to be cancelled, so we couldn't provide that information. They are concerned about it, like we are. They flag it as one of the Annexure A findings. And the other one is we changed the measurement of some of our radio audiences, or we expect it to be changed. It's just not changed as we expected it. We expected to be able to report at a percentage level certain of our radio audiences because our service provider was in the process of changing their measurements. However, when we get the measurements, eventually it comes in absolute numbers and it couldn't be translated into percentages. So we were unable to meet that specific expectation as well. Both those items have been addressed at the root in the new financial year, 2023, and also in 2024, when we then align the measures with the information and the measurements that we can get. And they also, so those were the main themes in the AG Annexure A findings. I won't yet speak about going concern. I'll get to that in a second, as well as their comments on the turnaround strategy. The other one was the material irregularity that they flagged potential of, but they have since, in consultation with us, agreed that that is no longer a material irregularity. I've got about 8 minutes left, Chair. I've spoken a lot about the 2 initiatives.
Okay, and you can add a bit more. You are lobbying for this time increase at every appropriate interval. I've got the message. She keeps sneaking it in, so it's fine. Just to carry on, it's fine.
No, Chair, I want you to tell me to stop. I'm not used to having so much spotlight on me. I have touched on a lot of the theme in the next 2 submissions, but to summarize for you perhaps, and we're now looking at the instances excluding the condoned ones because of the way we can report for the 2022 year on which we were supposed to take criminal action, the consequence management on. So we identified about 29 instances that there is supposed to be these transgressions, of which 13 we have completed the investigations for the people now. 14 of those people, of the transgressions, the people have resigned or has been dismissed, and there were 9 instances of applied consequence management. 16 transgressions still needs to be investigated. We're at about 40% of investigations concluded overall on year to date This was still, I think, the 800 million or so, and we are at about 54% overall of consequence management completed, and this is now from 2018 to date. I spoke, if we then look at a few of the themes that you see here, and of course the numbers that you have here are supplemented by detailed annexures and names based on our engagement with you in the past. You're interested in those things, so there are supplementary information, which I will not present, but it is available, of course. So a few themes that you find in the in-year i.e., it's those procurement processes not follows and others that I didn't specifically speak to, is I'll call it broadly legal matters. So we had a panel, I think, until about 2018. The panel refresh process starts, also not immediately. We have had a new panel following a regular process in place now for about 2 years. But in that 2-year gap, there are procurement processes that are not followed, and in some instances, legal department of then will say we want the specific service provider, and of course, as a specific legal firm is then dealing with the case, you don't change it, and therefore, even 5 years later, we still sit with a firm that was appointed back then, who's dealing with the current case, and therefore their names still feature. That is the main reason for this. Schedule all I've touched on. I won't speak about that. Payments without contracts, I've touched on that. Won't speak more about that. And then a theme that we are seized with, also Treasury is seized with it, and I'm sure you yourself will also question it, is who we apply consequence management to. You cannot just find the most junior official and hold that individual responsible. You need to look at the whole chain up to BAC level, even EXCO level and beyond, if that is necessary. So there's some of the National Treasury feedback that we got on instances from 2018-19. I did briefly touch on it as I was presenting. There were just a supply chain official held responsible at that point in time. We then look at, with the feedback from Treasury, look at the whole process and determine that the way supply chain was structured at that point in time, it was literally a specific person that was held responsible. We then changed the processes, and today we are able to, and also our loss control committee that presides over these submissions, look at the whole value chain of who is responsible or could be responsible, and we engage on each specific instance. Our investigation reports also list everybody that is involved right up to a BEC or EXCO level in the process, even if they may not have been privy to or should reasonably have been expected to understand there's an irregularity. They are part of the process. We then look at, this is now in terms of the new reporting way, where we look at also in engagement with National Treasury, we started changing, adding another layer of analysis to irregular expenditure to test the success of your interventions and to focus on in-year irregular awards in particular. And this is what we're trying to illustrate here. In 2022, there were in-year irregular awards of 24 million. That reduces to about 2.7 in the 2023 year, as it so happens. This is the main summary of the consequence management, and I will not go into the detail, but you can see the names listed, whether they've resigned, the process of consequence management, and various instances, and more detail is in the rest of the pack. A brief comment around going concern and our turnaround strategy on the back of the comments of the AG. So going concern as a matter of emphasis have been with the organization for the majority of the past 5 years. In 2018, we had the disclaimer audit opinion. It was just before we got the bailout and the turnaround strategy was approved, and there were material uncertainty around the organization's ability to settle its 12-month obligations back then. So going concern today is informed by a few main themes: revenue generation, expenditure management, and then cash flow management or working capital management. All those themes in the organization are getting particular attention currently. also connected with this, the turnaround comments that the AG made is the focus on revenue generation. The AG raises a concern that yes, we are concluding our activities, but there is a risk that we might not see the benefit realization from these activities. We do a little bit of a self-assessment about 8 months ago and conclude that we are in terms of benefit realization of the full 120 activities, we're at about 70%. The main items that have not yet or will still in future yield benefits relates to the regulatory refreshment or evolution almost in a way, and then the revenue generation. When we drafted the action plan for the turnaround, it was a different world, as we all know. It is a jump forward. We had to, with the rest of the world, respond to what happened with the pandemic, the outside economical environment in any case worldwide, but we also have internal challenges. So main focus currently, the GCO calls it the growth phase, but it's on the revenue the improvement plan to be able to supplement our going concern discussions, even where I sit here today. Expenditure management is a regular theme. I've spoken about that already, and how we continue to enforce the message of cost discipline. We are currently also bringing in austerity measures to supplement the ability to maintain a going concern assessment. And I think, Chair, I have tried to, in the back of my mind, remember all the main themes that the AG raised. I am not going to say I was very successful, but I think at this point I will conclude. I think if I scan through the list, what we prepared, if you did want to, I can take you through another presentation we did to the PCC on material irregularities, audit findings and improvement, but I think to a large extent I have dealt with that. We included the specifics around the 2022 irregular expenditure note and its supporting documentation. We included removals, the full register, consequence management back then and now, and I've tried to set the scene there, and then we do the same for fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So maybe I am literally 1 minute over my time, and maybe it is now done, Chair. Thank you very much.
Don't mind the minister. He's up to his usual tricks. All right, thank you very much, CFO. I think in the question and answer session, you had liberty to expand on the issues that you may feel that you did not do justice to. Colleagues, thank you. Any other additions, CFO, CEO? All right. Okay. Right. Colleagues, questions? I don't see you here in the lists. All right, Mazamban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All the introductions have been done, so we know each other, and nice to have a new board with us, and that I nearly said the Prime Minister, the President has finally done the appointments. So we look forward to what is clearly, Mr. Chairman, an improving trend at the SABC. I don't think that any people who could say it's not improving, but nevertheless, as you said, I think there's still quite a long way to go. And many of my questions have actually been answered already, not in terms of fulfillment, but in direction. So let me just pinpoint a couple of issues that perhaps some more clarity may be relevant, and it's all about consequence management, and that's been covered over and over again this morning. And the Mafoko Security Services, I see you've produced a schedule with names and so on it, and then National Treasury did the condonation on the basis that the names of those and the case numbers would be reflected in the notes. So would you like to tell us who the names are? for Mafoko. Am I able to put a question or a whole range, Mr. Chairman?
I think we've got time. You can do a one.
One
One
and
on
one.
one,
Yeah.
This way, colleagues, you will, when your turn comes, you will decide how you.
How to do it. And I won't do a Glennis Breitenbach on anyone, Mr. Chairman.
You are treading on thin ice now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So the report flags board members of the interim board at that point in time, 3 of them, if I remember correctly. 4 of them, it flags 2 of the executive management at that time. Yeah, and I think some of the supply chain head. So I'm not sure we have the names, we can mention them. It is still in process, so you don't necessarily want to say that.
Mr. Chairman, we will go through this thing many times, I suppose, but the condemnation was done conditional on the names being made public. Has the condemnation then not gone through? Are they waiting until the names are public?
Through you, Chair. So the names will be published when this tribunal issues their judgment, and whatever the judgment says will then be applied. It's my understanding.
Okay, so then it's wrong to say the condemnation has the National Treasury have condoned, because the condition they applied hasn't yet been met. So the condemnation still hasn't gone through. And then perhaps the Minister, we can have, do you recall a meeting we had in your office about 10 years ago where we... no, we won't go down that road. I wave for the Minister.
No, I'm saying I understand Yolanda to be cautious in the sense that when tribunal concludes its work, some adjudication which would have taken care of the total aspects of justice would have completed its work. A risk now at this stage of just throwing people's name, if you so guide, you can so guide yourself.
I think let's wait for the tribunal process. I know that we have issue with that, but there's a process underway. I think maybe what we would want is a timeline in terms of when that would be concluded. But yeah, Mazamban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the same then apply to Lorna Vision?
Chair, through you. So Treasury condoned Lorna Vision, but they didn't have the same condition. And Lorna Vision it's not gone to the tribunal as far as I now suddenly remember, but they did condone it because of the consequence management that were applied, executive management at the time.
Thanks, Yolanda. And so who were those executive management who were faced with consequences?
I am not 100% sure, but it would have been the previous supply chain. I don't know if the then CEO was involved.
If I may, Chair, it was it's part of the report from the SIU. It was the group executive for sales. There was also the head of supply chain that was also involved in that. The names had been provided previously from the SIU's report.
Thank you. Then, what is the consequences for Madoda Shosho in terms of the issue with Quizzical Pictures?
He got a verbal warning, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't it?
In terms of any recoveries from him for the irregular expenditure?
Chair, I'm not going to say through you, Chair, every time. Okay.
And just
No, so No recoveries took place. With irregular expenditure, you do in the process assess whether there was fraud and corruption, and a SABC case and recovery should then follow. But in this case, we did not believe there was fraud and corruption. We did get services for what we contracted for there.
Thanks, and then the success fee of 11.5 million that was paid to the former COO, was that recovered?
6 to 7 million, 6.9 million of that has been received in our bank account here in the 2023 year.
And we're still chasing the balance?
Yeah, I think there's an arrangement, and the balance is still supposed to be paid. My advocate will have the detail, but yeah, 7 million is in our bank account.
Okay, let's get that detail then, if it's available, so that there's clarity and conclusion to the question.
No, thanks, Chair. The CFO is correct. Payment just over 6.5 million has been paid into our account. Since the judgment, that is monies, the committee would recall, we did do an application to freeze the pension benefit due to the individual consent. So that is the amount that came from the pension fund. The total amount inclusive of the interest escalated from date of payment of the amount involved to the date of judgment at the Supreme Court of Appeal to 18 million plus. We were then in the process of getting the relevant individual to pay the outstanding amount, alternatively to make acceptable arrangements, when we received an application for a reconsideration of the Supreme Court of Appeal order, which has now put on these panels on the wax. We are waiting for the reconsideration of that matter at the SCA before we could proceed further. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Advocate. Let me just get some clarity. So you held back pension funds, but the matter is not concluded yet. Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, pension benefits were withheld through a court order. Remember, the matter had gone to the High Court, where judgment was in favor of the SABC with cost. There was immediately leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. The Supreme Court of Appeal then dismissed the application for leave to appeal, and immediately the pension fund, on receipt of that order, paid over the money, 6.5 million. Days later, as we were preparing to either execute and also compute the interest as well as legal costs, inclusive of the cost at the Supreme Court of Appeal, we were then hit with this application for reconsideration, until we then received an order from the Supreme Court of Appeal saying they are going to reconsider the matter. That is what then stopped us from executing.
Yeah, thank you. That's as I understood. So there's still a danger that the ruling will be against the SABC. It doesn't sound likely, but there is a possibility with a low probability, which would mean that that 6.7 would need to be refunded to someone. But time will tell, I suppose. Let's let the courts take their time. No, not take their time. Do their job as quickly as possible. Then the next one then is the Telkom Mercer Reinecker issue. Has that disciplinary process now for the 3 million there been resolved? It was paid to Telkom without, it's one of the ones without a contract. I'm not sure that you actually, perhaps I missed it when you were presenting. Did you cover it?
No, I didn't, sir. So the problem there is, firstly, we got services. This is our Metro Ethernet line, and we did get the services. everybody had resigned there, so we couldn't proceed with consequence management, and we did get services. So no, we're not proceeding with the recovery of the 3 million. Just a correction on the quizzical picture one. Yeah, the 26 million. 26,000 rand. I forgot about that one, and I see the process is still ongoing to consider whether it's possible. But because the individual resigned, then we will have to probably open a case at SABC and look at it from that perspective.
Okay, so that's that lot. Then the were there anyone held responsible for the rentals paid for unoccupied offices? I mean, the contract, SIU's done its thing, a contract is going to be cancelled or has been cancelled. Was anyone held accountable within the SABC?
All the individuals involved at that time is no longer with the organization. We will, the best we can do currently is to recover the money or the majority of it from the then landlord.
And we're not pursuing a civil case against the employees who've left. I mean, presumably they were delinquent in some way, or.
So we certainly will consider that when we get the final ruling and how much we can recover, and then the engagement with the landlord will determine if there's a further loss, then it's 100% within our right to do that.
Different mic, Mr. Chairman. I think you've covered a lot of the ones that are here on this list, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I just want to check that the debt collection fee for the NCC group, did you cover that one?
No, I didn't speak about that one. So comes from invoices that were raised in 2020 and 21, March 2020, 21 for us, this escrow fee. We've got software in escrow with them. Unfortunately, the original business process owner, the story is much older than 2020, and the person is no longer here. So they are still busy investigating if it will be possible to find somebody that was involved at that point in time, and the process is still ongoing.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm just highlighting these things, but I really am encouraged by the efforts that seem to be being made, and I look forward to the next interaction, seeing lots of progress, more progress. But so, whilst I'm probing, I do see some positives. Then you mentioned the missed flights. In your quarterly report, you say the costs will be recovered from the employee. Has that been done?
Yes, it was recovered in 2023 financial year.
Good. I think we should apply that in Parliament, shouldn't we, Mr. Chairman? Sorry, my sense
we
of
can
humour.
make recommendations to the Joint Standing Committee on Parliament. It's meeting on Friday, but don't miss your oversights as well.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the predetermined objectives you has dealt with, the two things that were picked up by the AG. Again, action has been taken. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I've got a whole lot of stuff here which has been preempted. I mean, you've made my job much easier. Thank you. Not that you've finished everything, but you certainly have dealt with it. And so I'm going to pass the baton on, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
You would imagine after 2 postponements, they've had sufficient time to prepare. There's been ample time. Right, Honourable Hadebe, over to you, Honourable Member, stand by.
Thanks, Chair. No, indeed, they have covered a lot of ground, and congratulations to the team. The board is fairly new, 1 month, 13 days. Yeah. They were appointed on the April.
Took a long time.
Yeah. And welcome. This is the only time, Chair, I was looking forward to see the full complement of the board, seeing that it has taken this long for them to be appointed. But nonetheless, I'm just going to ask very direct question. I know we've received a lot of presentations. They might have tried to cover some of the issues that I'm going to raise. I won't be long this time. Umazamban has covered most of the questions that I wanted to ask. But what is concerning to the board, minister, and the management is that I think for 5 years now in a row, you have been constantly failing to deal with the issue of irregular expenditure. AG is saying you have not taken effective and appropriate steps first to identify and record all instances of irregular expenditure. So the progress that we are seeing does not tell the full story, because not all instances have been identified and recorded. And in some instances, you rely on audit process to identify instances of irregular expenditure. And there's the issue, hence the qualification in terms of the completeness. So the recommendation that was given by the AG, they recommended that management should continue with the process to conclude on the completeness of irregular expenditure. And you have implemented what project review, and in that you made an undertaking that the process will be concluded by November 2022. That was your own commitment. So I would like to get an understanding whether or not have you managed to conclude this process. Are we satisfied that in the next financial year you will be able to disclose all instances of irregular expenditure? That's just a direct question based on your undertaking.
Thank you, Honourable Hadebe. So let me start with just referring to the new National Treasury Instruction Note in January 2023 that no longer requires the opening balance to be in the annual financial statements. We report in-year instances only, but we do include additional information in our annual report specifically, but that of course is not audited. However, we have concluded 100% of the population review of all vendor payments from 1 April 2018, as I sit here today, despite the fact that we had to shift our capacity to to the 2023 year recently, following the issuance of the instruction. And we were starting to engage with the AG on the period pre-2018, so going back to that 2012 year. And there was a service provider that did the register in 2016-17. We concluded the work that they presented to us, that their contract was subject to an SIU investigation that was cleared in the course of last year. So we could conclude that project and use that input. And we were then looking at ways to deal with those old transactions. Working with the AG, we had developed the first round of a SOP to be able to do that, and had socialized it with them, and they were satisfied. What then stopped us from concluding the old IE, pre-1 April 2018, was the capacity issues in the team who does this. This is ideally a 5-position team. We had 1 investigator and a manager. I did briefly refer to the capacity challenges we have in supply chain and the specific team earlier, and you see it in the reports where we speak about the challenges. So we don't make the November date for the full population from 2012. We then we would have probably done it by now if it wasn't for the instruction note. We had reallocated all our capacity to the old period. We then get the Treasury instruction note in January, and we can then conclude the 23 work rather.
So, in future, moving forward, the issue of completeness won't be an issue. We are not going to be faced with a situation where you are qualified based on irregular expenditure.
So my board chair asked me the same question earlier this week.
We didn't caucus, be rest assured.
No. So if we are able to consistently not get a qualification on in-year, and consistently within we will now be, it's the second year that the AG will test our process to ensure completeness. If we manage to cross this hurdle for the 2023 financial year, then I'll be a little bit more comfortable. But I'm not.
That's what I'm trying to ascertain. Are you able to cross that hurdle?
Hey, I wouldn't want. This is a recording. It will be held against me if I don't make it. We've done a lot, but I'm not confident to say there won't be something that pops up yet.
We'll cross that bridge.
How far is the bridge?
Well, yeah, the bridge is already behind us. It's the auditors that must now say if we did.
All right.
I think, Honourable,
Yeah.
I think in the midst of the candor, specifics will be important, so that we provide clarity on these issues. So if you're saying it's with the auditors, then I think Honourable Adabe flagged the matter, and I think to our secretariat noted as part of the issues to be looked at when the annual report is submitted, so that there's particular not focus, but highlighting it for the purposes of making sure it doesn't fall through the cracks, so that if it doesn't come up, we can reference back as to why not. But seemingly the SABC is optimistic, but the audit will confirm or otherwise.
No, thanks. Between the 1st of April 2018 to the 31st of March 2022, there were 387 irregular transactions, which were totaling at the time at 867 million. However, you only managed to deal with 10%, which was 34. Has there been any progress and improvement in dealing with the transgressions? I've seen a lot of numbers, but I could not get the summary as it was back then when we were given the figure of 34, which is 10%. Where are we now in relation to the 387 irregular transactions? Have we effected consequence management?
So, as at, and this is the annexure that says investigations, consequence management as at March 2023. It's one of the last in the list. I don't have the J, I think. We're at 51% investigations concluded and 54% consequence management included, but it also includes the 2023 financial year.
Okay, what are the numbers? It was 34 then. So
The percentage.
the percentage was 10%, which was 34. So when you're saying you had 50, how many the actual figure? And how much is left?
Okay, so that same report, Pumzile must just help me interpret it on that page 3. 445 million rands worth of investigations have been concluded. 423 million rand is outstanding. That's of the 800 approximate million. Consequence management has been performed on 474 million rand, and 395 million rand needs to still be dealt with. That's the 40 and 54% that I mentioned.
On your annual financial statement, the AG has also indicated that the statement that were submitted were not prepared in accordance to the prescript of the financial reporting framework. Again here, so in essence, you're relying on audit processes to correct your financial misstatement. When are you going to completely deal with this matter and stop relying on audit process to correct your financial misstatement? I mean, you have professionals which should take pride of their work. So if AG can pick up material misstatement, having short space of time to deal with your audit, yet you have a team that's full-time in the office and they cannot pick up, and then they submit something, that's a serious call for concern. So are we going to be faced with a similar instances in future? Have you dealt with this root cause of financial misstatement?
So the main reason for that statement is the completeness of the IE register. That is why they say, because we couldn't confirm the 100% completeness from 2012 onwards, it's a material adjustment that could be possible, but they, nor us, knew at the time how much that could be. That was the main reason. Then we did have some discrepancies between numbers on the financial statements and supporting schedules. No excuse for that. This year there's a zero tolerance. It's just error. It's totally unacceptable, and there will be consequence management. Then the other number that was, or the process that was a bit of a challenge, is the actuarial valuations. That comes from our pension fund, medical aid, and one or two other of our main liabilities. And there was a timing issue there, so we didn't have the correct amount in the AFs when we hand over. This year we managed that process better. Then we also worked and emphasized these lessons learned with group internal audit. They normally assess our AFs before it is handed over, so they also took the input that we got from the AG and worked on their processes to help us avoid these kind of things. And last but not least, we brought on board a third-party service provider, quality assurance provider, this year to also help us review the AFs to ensure compliance as best as is possible.
All right. When the head of supply chain post was filled and the incumbent only stayed for 4 months and left, what were the reasons? Do you perhaps know, so that we don't repeat the same thing? Is the environment not conducive for professionals at SABC?
No, sir. In this case, not. She had health issues, and the family relocated. Yeah.
And you said the post has been subsequently filled.
Yeah, that's the lady sitting there.
And no health.
She's still here.
She's okay. The material irregularities. What's the latest on the recently identified MI by the Auditor General?
As far as I know, we're still awaiting the tribunal outcomes. There is the advocate has a fancy term for it, but ideally you want the judgments to be issued in about a 3-month turnaround time, but it's not in your ability to influence that or encourage it even. So we follow up tactfully once in a while, and that's it.
Now, I'm trying to, have you made a follow-up to understand what causes the delay? Or you just leave it there, you'll get the report as and when it's done. Are there any issues that are brought to your attention that are causing the delay?
None that I'm aware of. It is about the workload, was my understanding mainly. And the Mafoko matter in particular, I think, was quite a complex matter to be considered. That's sort of the extent of the feedback we get.
So you've terminated the services of Mafoko, or the contract ended? How did you part ways?
The contract expired.
Okay, so you did not terminate. Because I was concerned that even though it was irregular, you allowed Mafoko to continue.
So if it was as a result of the organization not following its processes, then it's not an unlawful contract. You can still approach the court and they can set it aside, having applied their mind to the matter. And we did try to do it with the Mbombela contract. That contract was even declared unlawful, so the process was underway. But the Mafoko one in Auckland Park was not an unlawful contract, and it was our fault. Or our actions that resulted in it, in my understanding, and therefore we didn't proceed to request that to be declared by a competent court unlawful and set aside.
And as Honorable Mazaman asked, those that were responsible for such, they've faced the music, or you indicated that they've already left?
Mafoko in specific, we are waiting for the outcome of the judgment. They challenged the SIU report. So, and we joined SIU, they challenged it, and we're all now in front of the special tribunal for this purpose, in my understanding.
So meaning they're still within the establishment of the entity?
No. Nobody that was involved back then still works for the organization.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chair. Once again, keep up the good work. We'll be waiting with keen interest to see if there's going to be an improvement in the audit outcome of the next financial year. We'll give the board space and time to, yeah, to understand matters, and I would have loved to get a sense and an understanding from the chair of the board whether or not you are convinced with the current feedback. I don't know how many meetings have you had as an accounting authority. Are you confident that issues as highlighted by the Auditor General and recommendations made, your management team is equal to the task? Are you convinced? I know it's only 1 month, 13 days, but I'm sure you have already convened several meetings. You've looked into the findings, the action plan, and what was implemented. And I'm specifically referring to the lack of consequence management, not submitting according to prescripts, and all those things, having to pay taxes of unoccupied, interest, buildings that are not occupied. Given the report and the progress that we have received from the management, are you comfortable that we're going to achieve unqualified clean audit?
I think
in your view, do you think there are still red flags that needs to be attended to?
I think let's get a response maybe to Angli to say what's your initial assessment, and then I think it's important for us to get commitments.
So that you judge you by what you have committed here. You see, we're not asking you about the historic issues. Now we want you to commit.
Phrase we have in this committee, and it opens up some leeway. We say, holding you committed to your own commitments.
No, thank you, Chair. I think Honorable Handebe is leading me down a very dangerous path. so I'll be very careful how I choose my words. Look, I think the The assessment of the board is that, as I think the committee has acknowledged, that there is progress made. And for us, our view is that we should try and move as quickly as possible to close these matters. Also because you would appreciate that some of these matters are going back 2017, 2018. The resource capacity within the SABC, in our view, should be freed from looking back, but should focus on the present and the future. And I think that's how we take the SABC forward. So we will work with management, and the chair of ARC is here. We thought it was important that she comes here because we think that these engagements will also assist in crafting a way forward on the priorities, as it were. So the committee has met with management. They would have processed these matters and so forth. And if Chair, you allow, I could allow you to just briefly speak on some of the issues that they've been focusing on. Of course, now we're also looking at the 2022-2023 financial year, which now will be subject to audit. So as the GCFO said, I asked the same questions that you are asking. The qualification point was a regular expenditure. Fundamentally, the question of the opening balance. So of course, the Treasury practice note assists, because at least we will not be audited on the opening balance. The fundamental question is, have we improved our control environment enough to make sure that at least what relates to 22-23, we have identified everything? So if you ask me, I would say, if we get that right, we should be in the clear. Of course, there's a broader question of going concern, which has been an area of concern from the AG for the last couple of years. That is one area that I think it's an area that we're focusing on, and making sure that we're able to put forward strong and substantive evidence to demonstrate that we are a going concern in the foreseeable future. I think if we're able to attend to those two issues, we potentially could have an improvement in the audit outcome for 22-23. Thank you.
Okay, let's get Minister Chair of ARC standby.
You just before Palisa comes in, just to tighten what the chair has said. Actually, I feel preempted by him. When you were saying, the AG says you are less proactive, you more react to my findings. And I think the chair now is addressing that. I thought I wanted to say, it's my view that most of the time the SCM capacity would not be the issue when controls are in place. Because when the controls are in place, you would patch up the capacity issue just to make sure that the controls stay in place. But if controls are not in place, it's easy to run behind capacity. And I think the chair has addressed that. But I thought I wanted to make that point.
Fair enough. Chair of ARC.
Thank you, Chair and members, for this opportunity. I think we're almost sleeping at Auckland Park as we arrived. A month feels like a whole term at this point. And with management's cooperation, we have asked very difficult questions, and also are devising a plan. I think Chairperson's insistence on strategy will assist us in this regard. Really, what keeps us awake as audit is the revenue part of it. How then do we drive a production or a machinery that will not work on fuel, electricity, or solar? So we have to have some form of energy that will be put in, and that requires a very firm revenue strategy. And we've asked for that, which then speaks to the business model of the organization. Otherwise, there'll be nothing to audit, Chair, after all. The second part then also giving us sleepless nights is the public mandate issue, the funding of that aspect. I understand there was also an elections meeting referring to the costs and also how are we going to manage the upcoming, given the state of the organization, the cooperation at this point, we need to look into that. Overall, as you are saying as members, we take it that the interest on recoveries is high, and the same questions we are asking as to whether you have resigned, left, or staying out of the country. We need to find you. We need some form of follow through. So these are some of the aspects we keep on punting and putting emphasis on. I'm not going to be long. I don't want to make huge commitments at this point, but we are alive to the reality of the inheritance and remain very committed into finding ways and cordial ways of resolving what is at hand in terms of the status, especially the financial sustainability of the organization. Thank you.
So Chair, if I may ask then, so there's still a doubt in terms of your ability to continue as a going concern? Are you, I don't want to take it to the extreme and say, are you trading recklessly? But will that still remain a major concern even for the AG in the coming audit?
Through your chair. Yeah, yeah. No, oh, okay. I was
See the risks that come with being a benevolent dictator.
No, look, as indicated, this has been, and I think GCO, you can also come in, this has been an area that the AG has constantly been concerned about in the last couple of years. So we don't expect that things will be different for 22, 23. In fact, we do think that there might be even a more sharp focus on it for 22, 23. Yeah, yeah. So we expect that there will be a sharp focus. Suffice to say that we believe that we will still be here 12 months from now, which is the period of consideration of assessment, and hence we've prepared our financial statements on a going concern basis. And we also, and we have had these discussions with the executive management to say that this which makes us believe that will be in existence 12 months from now, we must package it so that we demonstrate and we make a case, a persuading case to the AGSA, and we are convinced that we will be able to make a persuading case, but I don't expect it to be an easy conversation, but we are convinced we can persuade them, and we hope we will. GCO.
Thank you, Chair. It is a huge concern from a commercial viability point of view, and I do not want to intrude into the previous fiscal, but our audience ratings, which is really our currency to trade, has declined quite significantly by about 40%. And this is largely due to the analog switch off, which is quite critical and imperative for the country, but it then affects our ability to package the audiences to go and sell it to the various clients. The Broadcast Research Council of South Africa has identified this as a huge risk for the SABC, because when your audiences decline, naturally, it has a correlation from a revenue point of view. I always make a very simple example. Uzalo about 14 months ago was standing at just over 10 million viewers per night. Now it's half of that. If I go to a client and package it from a pricing point of view, they will ask me, why should I pay more? Because now it's actually half the audiences. So when you talk about the need to generate revenue, this is at the heart of what we're talking about. And coupled with that, and we discussed this with the minister, the regulations do not help. We are obliged that, for example, we only need to advertise about 12 minutes of every hour. And most competitors are not subjected to that. 48% of our television program is geared towards unfunded mandate, and that's largely children, religion, as well as education content, which unfortunately it does not sell in the market. Nobody wants to buy into those. Radio, it's about 20% dedicated towards the unfunded mandate. And the coalescence of all of these, it does affect our ability to go to the market. And hence, Minister was talking about the need to expedite the finalization of the SABC bill. So it'll definitely be a huge concern coming in the past fiscal. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I think we'll continue to monitor such. And for the sake of progress, Chair, I think I'm going to end here and go and attend to other matters. As Gatem.
All right, Honorable Hatebe has to go to COCTA as well. But I think, CEO, you are opening a door for another conversation, which becomes of critical importance. Revenue generation vis-a-vis the public mandate. Because what becomes the inevitable conclusion is that you have to be bailed out. So I think what you raised is probably at the heart of the turnaround strategy, which the board needs to drive, but I think, Minister, also from a legislative regulatory point of view, with all the concerned parties and statutory bodies whom have got a role in this. Because, you see, the Chair of ARC touches on elections. That comes with an added burden of its own advertising requirements, which are going to, in one way or the other, be changed if the current Electoral Amendment Act stands insofar as independent candidates are concerned. I know that some people are considering taking it to court and say that it doesn't pass constitutional muster for whatever reasons they may have, but the bottom line is that it's been signed into law. And it changes the entire election framework and advertising that comes with it, further eating into your time and your revenue generation capacity. And that is what then leads to the need for bailouts, government guarantees, and so on. And so the public mandate versus commercial obligations dichotomy adds another strain to the outlook of what you have to handle, considering your competitors whom do not have the kind of obligations that you do. And so I think those are all factors that we have to consider. And I raise them simply from a perspective to say, then the taxpayer has to come in. A strained fiscus, may not be able to meet the commitments and obligations which may be exerted on the SABC. And so I think there's a fundamental consideration that has to be done around that and the impact that it has on revenue, profit, and sustainability insofar as the SABC is concerned. I was just reacting to what the CEO was raising, which is opening a fundamental perspective, which has got a material bearing on how you move forward. Yeah. Minister, and then Honourable Mente will come in.
No, thanks, Chair. That's what I was attempting to do at my opening remarks. When I was looking at the 120, what do you call them, action plans? Yes. That although 105 is implemented, it doesn't speak much to unlocking of bigger revenue, because the bigger revenue lies in regulation and the law that includes releasing spectrum in a short space of time. I think as government and the department in particular, it's a matter that we're deliberately burdening ourselves with. So we scratch our conscience that until we sort out those issues, the kind of demand we want from them needs to be against us doing that timeously. And I'm saying we do make that commitment. It's quite a serious issue. There's a lot of money that is locked in that policy. Amount of money locked in the release of protocol of the spectrum. And of course, there's another percentage of institutional competencies which they do acknowledge, which must be resolved. Because even if you were to do this, if those internal institutional competencies are not sorted, still you will not resolve. But however, I thought it's important to put that into perspective in line with the concern that you have expressed in response to the GCO.
Very much, Minister. Honourable Mente, over to you.
Okay, Ngozi Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. Chair, let me just a bit touch on the latest remarks, especially what the Minister is now responding to, pertaining to the legislative demands that are being embarked on in order to change the status quo. One concern I have is that, Minister, SABC has a minister for a reason, because it's a public entity. It's not newsroom. It's not ETV. It's SABC. Thus, a public mandate that it carries that mission has to be accomplished. So we cannot then, when we are looking for a business model of SABC and starting to compare it to private sector and wanting it to depict what private sector is, it will not be. It's a public entity, and its business model has to be suitable to the needs of a public entity. That is why it is important, as and when we are getting people into the space of SABC, the first thing they have to appreciate is that this is not a business company that is looking for profits. This is a business company that must deliver a public mandate. And how we then draft and craft any policy within this space needs to fulfill that mandate. So I wanted to, Chair, highlight that. I'm not asking a question to anyone, but I want to highlight the fact that this is not like any other entity. So when Chair says it will have to come to a point of business, what do you call it? No, not business rescue. Coming to Parliament and asking for recapitalization or what. So if you have to be bailed out, you will be bailed out. But you will be bailed out on the basis of, are we satisfied with the internal capacity, what the Minister is talking to? Are we satisfied with the internal systems? Are we moving forward or are we moving backwards? But the mentality that this has to be shifted from being a public entity to a private operative machine is not going to work, because it's not. Thank you very much. Now, earlier on, CEO, you spoke to, when you were answering the issue of Mafoko, you made a statement that yes, the problem was not on the side of the bidder. The problem was on the side of the people who were handling the bidding. And I want to, in my head, I'm imagining that a bidding process is not only done at one level and it ends there. So the people that were involved in that bidding, as much as you are saying now everyone is no longer within the establishment, could they all have gotten it wrong, all by themselves? When you're acknowledging that it was your side, did you establish the fact that all of them agreed that it was wrong? And they all got it wrong into giving a wrong bidder a wrong scoring? I want to check that.
So, no, Honourable Mente, the right bidder was recommended. The decision-making bodies that came after the BAC made a different decision. They had their reasons, and that's why they're challenging the SIU recommendations. But the process up to the bid adjudication committee, in my understanding, was as it was regular. There's certain things that happened beyond that. That is why we found ourselves here.
Yeah, that's exactly why I'm bringing it back, because now we have people who are challenging the reports of investigations. Now, the state had to waste money through SIU. SAB wasted money through investigations of that. Now we must still go and defend the very same thing in court. And the BACs who overruled the outcomes of the bidding committee. And according to you, if ever those people are going to now defend, in fact, challenge the outcomes of the SIU, they are challenging the outcomes of SABC. At what point are we going to stop using the state money, challenging each other over something that was done by a person who we have no clear explanation as to what happened to them? At what point is this going to stop, and who overruled the bidding process?
The bidding process, in my understanding, and noting it's before any of ours time there, was overruled at the interim board level. And they believe they have justification for why they chose to go with bidder number 2 at the time instead of the recommended one, bidder number 1. And that's why I believe they are challenging it.
So it's those boards that are challenging it now. They are not being paid for by SABC. Okay, that's out of the way, because I'm avoiding a space where we all sit here and agree that we challenge each other and use the state money again. That's fine. As far as the irregular expenditure is concerned, the AG says this has not been disclosed to its full extent. What do you understand of that?
Thank you, Honourable. As my advocate wanted to catch my eye on the previous question, so he managed to quote it now. Will you allow him an opportunity to also just briefly speak to the Mafoko matter, if you don't mind, Chair?
Yeah,
through you?
thank you.
I'll respond to your question, Honourable Member.
No, thanks, Chair. Just to clarify the SABC's position with regard to the transaction in question. After the SIU had investigated the matter, it submitted a report to board. The board considered the report and agreed with the findings of the SIU. And the board's position was and is still that the agreement needed to be set aside, and monies that are due to the SABC needs to be recovered. And that is the position of the SABC in the legal proceedings. Those that are opposed to the SIU process or the findings have lodged their own application to challenge the findings. But as the COFO correctly indicated, they are doing so from their own pockets. And we're only waiting for judgment on this matter since the 11th of May last year. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we can hear that.
So you are waiting a judgment, as that from?
11 May 2022, Chair.
The judgment has still not come.
That's correct.
So it goes to what Honorable Lees was saying. The courts also need to sort of wake up and move with a particular speed and agility in these matters, because they hamstrung entities. So I'm just, Honorable Lees did raise this thing earlier on, and it's a year later. Yeah, okay, Honorable Mente. She was going to respond to your question that you raised, and then you can proceed.
Your question was, what do I understand as full? So full means we literally need to test every single payment we make in a financial year, and in this case going back to 2012, to determine whether the process to make that payment was regular. And that is where I now earlier said that as I stand here sit here today, we're at 100% complete. Nearly 18 billion rands worth of payments were tested from 2018, 1 April 2018. We were busy dealing with the period pre that. Up until November last year, we were not able to do the 100% completeness check then of the process, and then the Treasury instruction note came in January.
So now that you have almost tested everything up to almost 100%, is the same reflection not going to appear in your upcoming annual report?
So by virtue of the instruction note, we no longer are required to disclose the opening balance in the annual financial statements. You only report the in-year instances that you recorded. We have to report more detail in the annual report, though. So there's a separate section that will henceforth deal with how much is under investigation, what was condoned, etc. But that's in the annual report, and it's not subject to audit. So for the AFS, specifically the annual financial statements, the question is then, have we done enough to confirm that we've tested 100% on the AFS number? Currently, that number for this current financial year, 2023, is around 35 million that you saw in the submissions.
There lies again another problem, because according to the Treasury instruction and its limitations, is not going to give us a true reflection of financial expenditure of the entity. An entity that is sitting with the previous balances that must still be cleared on its statements. How are you going to deal with that? Because the statement of the latest instruction of National Treasury does not say everything else must be taken out. Hence, it must be reflected on the annual report. But my problem and my concern is, how is that going to be dealt with, so to its full extent, so that everything is accounted for?
So let me again deal first with the period 2018 to date, and then I'll briefly speak to the period before then. So now that we've concluded 100% test on the past 5 years, That's where you get the 40% of investigations concluded and the 54% of consequence managements concluded. So we are carrying on with those activities and we will conclude them. What we then need to deal with is the period pre that. Now, the further back you go in the past, the more constrained you are in terms of the who was there and the what is there, the documentation. And we have been looking at ways to find efficient manners in which to deal with those old irregular expenditure. We're engaging constantly with the AG on the topic as well as National Treasury, because ultimately it will need to satisfy their criteria, whatever we do. Even if they choose not to condone, our board will have very similar questions. So it's trying to find the most efficient way to deal with the old things that we currently are confronted with. But we're not stopping it. Well, in any case, not while I'm still there. So.
No, we get your affirmation of not stopping it because, in fact, you know, the reason why for 2 occasions we had to postpone the meeting because there was no board. It was precisely because some of these things are under your tenure. And I looked at the executive management that was there when 2021-2022 was signed. I think 70% of the faces are still there. You are at 54% in terms of consequence management. And in the process of that, people are resigning and are leaving the entity. And others are getting employed elsewhere. How are you dealing with such instances?
So yeah, I mean, we Treasury actually do require consequence management to be concluded within a 90-day period. It's not an excuse, but it's our reality that we have this capacity issue that stops the investigation team because they investigate it, indicate who's all in the process, and then the consequence management follow. And that is a problem for us. But then in terms of dealing with how, so if there's fraud or corruption or there's enough substantiation for a civil litigation, we will definitely proceed with that. The unfortunate part is if a person left and it was negligence and they would have gone through the disciplinary process, we can no longer proceed with that. And I think my sense is it's a general concern in government. They will resign just before they get held to account, and then they move to another government entity as if nothing ever happened. And it's something we are confronted with as well. What do you do then? But I think our abilities in law is then a little bit limited, if I can put it like that, and in my layperson's understanding of it. The bottom line is we must speed it up. That's what we must do.
So, Minister, there's a room to apply what is done in India. In India, you can go anywhere if ever you are charged. And you cannot, so legislation has to be changed. Where a person, once there is a case against them, they cannot be allowed to resign. They should not be allowed to even move to any other department. So it means that we are sending you to the cabinet to propose. Or we are going to have a private member bill on that, and we are not going to be stopped by cabinet or majority, because this now becomes a hindrance in us getting the state and our entities correct. Coming back to the irregular expenditure, you did not reflect on the status of the deviations, because out of the 51, I think it was 51 million of the contracts that were not done according to the procurement processes, for one reason or the other, 11 million of that is on deviations. What's being done now about the deviations? And what is being done to the people who deviated, even when National Treasury did not approve?
So There could be a good business reason. We have improved the planning. Often it is poor planning that sits at the bottom of a deviation. There's one that features in the list, the DJT matter. It's a large number. Was purely bad planning from business. We fast-tracked that specific investigation report, as well as then the consequence management where it needed to be applied. So today, when and there were subsequent guidance from Treasury around deviations, that is the instruction note that came out, I think, in May somewhere last year. I forget the note now, or the date, where it's now within the accounting authority's ability to approve deviations and expansions in the context of its delegation of authority, subject to reporting. Treasury is specific around what by other means are, what qualifies as deviations and expansions. We then enhanced our policy and SOP to deal with how we will in future engage on deviations and expansions. But overarchingly, the discipline and the culture in the organization, it is not a norm. If it's extraordinary and it's your bad planning, it is immediately flagged as irregular expenditure. We have automated the identification of irregular expenditure in our SAP system, our financial system. So the process immediately gets flagged right from the onset, and the rest of the steps are known. The bottom line is we've had with yourselves in the past very robust conversations around the behavior around deviations and expansions. We have reduced the instances, but there are still valid reasons where it is understandable, it's reasonable, and all those in that approval chain have satisfied themselves with the reasonability of that. But there are other instances where it's not the case, and then we proceed with the consequence management immediately.
So your assurance to us is that your subsystem now is up and running, and it gives you a red flag where there is no approval.
That part as well, but deviations also require, we still apply that 15% and 20%, which is per the Treasury regulation, which requires then the bid adjudication committee approval in certain instances when it exceeds that level. So the bid adjudication committee is made up of executives who engages with the motivation for said deviation and has the right to reject, and we have. We've also said we're not going to approve it. This is irregular expenditure. It's your bad planning. We will wait for the investigation report and the consequence management.
Now, there is an instant, Chair, on deviations, especially where bad planning is concerned. I think there was a COO over a virtual system who justified a deviation that could not have been prevented over a matter of it was a system or a software required for broadcasting and couldn't have been stopped. But a person who was supposed to have overseen a process of procuring a new software did not do that. What do we do in that case? And it's justified by that we are going to have blank screens if that software is not continued.
Yeah, that's what business tends to do to supply chain. I think when yourselves came to visit us in 2021, it was also a theme back then. Business does easily go to that reason and say, but there's black on air. So, and there's, maybe let me not go into the specifics, this might be some of the examples that is on the list has already been reported as irregular. So what we did in one of the instances is we fast-tracked the investigation report to indicate who were all involved. We then issued that and we followed up on the consequence management very quickly, and what we report on it here. But yeah, and there was a recent case, I forget the specifics of that one, in the now in last month or 3, where that same statement was made. We're going to be black on air. So the view was, well, then we will be black on air. It's your bad planning. You should have known better. If you then proceed with the irregular expenditure, expect to suffer the consequences that goes with that.
I'm not satisfied, because if we're outsourcing a service We all have diaries. We know at what point we need to start the procurement process, which includes bidding and all of that. And the timeframes are known by you. And at the time where the service or the process of procuring has to be started, someone's alarm rings. Yet that someone is overseen by someone else. So at the executive level, can we now sit confidently and say we are not going to be held at ransom by someone who's not going to procure a system deliberately, maybe because of a kickback or something, with whoever is providing that particular service to SABC at a price that's not even reasonable, and compromising the laws which are governing the procurement processes? What then becomes an assurance to us from the executive level? Because the problem which we identified even then was that it's not just only that person at SCM or at that department who knows this particular service time frame has lapsed. And if it's lapsing in 6 months' time, I have to start this process. There's an executive person who's in charge of that. Is that person also doing what they have to do in making sure that there are no laws that are being breached in the organization? Can we get assurance that all executives now, they've got their thumbs on the pulse?
So just in terms of that notification, we have an automated contract management system. It's been in place in the business for 3 or 4 years and functioning well. It's on the goods and services side, supply chain in particular. So you as the contract owner will get a notification 12, 9, 6, 3 months before the contract expires. So you have absolutely no excuse. It's the business process owner, and we started adding other officials to that list because of names that change. So that it's not just one person, and if they have left the organization, the email disappears into the ether. So there's no excuse anymore as far as certainly myself and supply chain is concerned. We have also, in the last year, supply chain has service level agreements with their main clients. Technology, for example, is a large client of procurement, and they get these specific meetings that happens, I think, once a month, and it's at different levels up to executive level, where they look at the status of contracts, tenders, etc., to ensure that you can't say you didn't know. A recent improvement that we did is, because expansions and deviations used to be dealt in a separate function in supply chain from the sourcing function. So we've now linked the two. So the sourcing specialist who's presiding over a tender process will know if the process is going to take longer and should initiate also the deviation or expansion sooner, so that you don't find yourself in that position where you're left with no choice. So we're hoping that all of these things means that business cannot say, this is now going to happen and I didn't know. There's absolutely no excuse. And then the executives know. They get the same contract lists. They report on it in technology specifically, for example. In their quarterly reports is a list of the status of their contracts and the aging thereof. So even recently I looked at the aging at the quarterly reviews and said, you only dealt with a few of those that are going to expiring in 3 months. You're comfortable in 6 months because you know supply chain takes for an open tender process could take 7 months. So don't come and talk to me. I chair the BAC. So I have absolutely no patience for it, much to my executives' distress, no doubt. But yeah, this is how it's supposed to be. They cannot say they didn't know.
I hope that the chair of the board is taking notes. You're saying you have linked the systems all up. In the very same vein, you say there was a recent occasion where a person gave that justification that we are going to have blank screens. We must deviate and expand the contract whilst we are carrying on the process. Who was that?
So the enhancement of demand management, the expansions and the tender offers, the sourcing, that is as in a month old, 2 months old. The other matter is before that. I can't remember the specifics, but it came to the BIC, and we had a very dim view of the motivation given, and we were quite emphatic about it. This is going to be irregular expenditure. You understand what that means, and the consequences will follow.
So you think that that's enough punishment for a person who let the system slip and only be told consequences will follow?
So, you can also not preempt an outcome. A person has rights. So the recommendation will be to the executive or the line manager, proceed with the consequence management. They must then consult with our disciplinary code to ensure that whether they decide if it's serious, the severity, depending on the seniority of the person, the financial implications involved, might determine that there's an external disciplinary process that needs to be followed. And a person has a right to then go say, or take their motivation for why they are in the position they are to said body where it will be adjudicated. So we can't preempt, but we follow up. We keep on hearing, has it happened? What is the status outcome of it? And our loss control committee, because they preside over all the condonation and right of request, ensure that there's a level of consistency. There's, of course, also, maybe you're a first-time offender, and depending on the offence, it could only be a verbal warning. Repeat it again, it's more serious. And, of course, the circumstances of an event is factored in as well. So we can't preempt it. We cannot say as a BIC, this is a summarily dismissal. We can't do that kind of stuff. The process then unfolds independently, and a person has a right to share their side of the circumstances.
It will be interesting to get the list of the latest developments, especially as far as deviations and expansions are concerned. We will equally do the same to National Treasury from their perspective, because when SABC was in trouble and a turnaround strategy had to be implemented, it was mostly attributed to, I don't want to say a wrong direction, but my perception is going there. It was attributed to a bloated staffing, that people must be retrenched. Yet the systems are not closing in the resources of SABC for SABC to be a competent and effective machinery. So we want to test so that we don't get chairperson of the board to a point where we got to, I think a year ago, it was during COVID, where we saw protest at SABC of workers being told your days are numbered, you are going to be kicked out for things they did not do. And I'm not standing for people who will be retrenched or be fired for laziness and all of that. If you're fired for laziness, that's your problem, that's your baby. But we cannot attribute the weaknesses of the systems caused by lack of monitoring by the people in charge, meaning which the board and the executives, and we start attributing it to the workers when the systems are not securing the pace of SABC. So to test that the pace of the SABC is secured, I don't know, Chair, how we can get that. Can we get now a status of deviations at SABC and expansions on a more of live transactions that are happening? Because 2 years down the line, Chair of the board, we're going to sit here and say there were deviations of this tenure. And we'll be saying those people are gone. We need to now test the effectiveness of the system. If, I don't know, Chair, you will assist us with when can we get that list? And that list should also go with all the irregular expenditures. As you are explaining, I wanted to do what Mazambane was doing, going transaction by transaction. It's gonna take us forever. But can we get all the transactions as flagged by the AG and then get the status of each and every transaction to test if the machinery is indeed working? But the last thing I want to check is, within the context of the disclosure of the financials not being in full extent, the explanation, I think 2 years ago, was that there was manual archiving. There are documents and evidence that Auditor General could not obtain. And that was due to documents being kept manually, procurement processes being done manually, and some of those things could not be found. We saw it with our eyes when we visited SABC. What is the status of that now?
So just with respect to deviations and expansions, we report on it, I think at least quarterly. I can't now suddenly remember if it's monthly as well, to Treasury. We report on yourselves quarterly. We share an update with you on our status of irregular expenditure. So we can, subject to the guidance from the chair, when he has time, we can include that list as an annexure on our standard quarterly report to yourselves, or we can share it separately, however the guidance is. So, yeah, no, the record keeping has improved. COVID, of course, helped all of us move on to electronic systems. What we do have a slight risk with, the IG also refers to it, is the receipt of tenders, both electronically and manually, and the controlling of that. So we keep on having to look at that process and enhance it. And you need a nice IT system to understand and work with that. We're not there yet, but it's majorly improved. But in general, because of COVID, in any case, that sort of made us have force a step change in how we control our records. The IG refers under the topic of record keeping. It's still the theme of the IE, especially the older things, because we couldn't confirm the completeness, and that had an element of record keeping under that, and together with the consequence management. So that's some of the things I mentioned under their topic called record keeping. The other one was the two PDO matters I mentioned, the inability to provide evidence for those predetermined objectives because of the system changes. That was records we couldn't provide to them, and when they speak about risks around record keeping, that's what they are referring to. I think those were the main ones they raised in their report.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mzibula, are you fine? Proceeding. Mazamban, are you fine? All right. Just quick issues. There's a matter I wanted to raise here. Right. Just want to. So the AG had indicated that you had initiated a project to review procurement transactions from 1 April 2018 to 31 March 2022. However, no reports or registers were submitted for audit by the reporting date to validate the work conducted on procurement transactions prior to 1 April 2018. During this period, 2018 to 2022, the vendor spend amounted to 14.8 billion, with 6.9 billion being subjected to investigation. These investigations led to the discovery of an additional irregular expenditure amounting to 43 million rands from prior periods, which of course was duly disclosed as of the reporting date, and the project completion rate was at 96%. What's the status of the review of the procurement transactions of that cited period?
So 100% from 1 April 2018 to date, Chair. And for the period before then, that's the one where we made the commitment that by November last year we would have done 100% for 2012 to 2018. But we couldn't because of the capacity challenges in supply chain. We carry on working, and then in January, the National Treasury instruction note comes, at which point we shift our internal capacity to the in-year instances rather, and driving the investigations and consequence management, then still focusing on that period pre-2018. But as I said earlier as well, we continue our work in concluding the completeness of that register, as well as the investigation and condemnation processes associated with it.
So how far are you with it? Because it was at 96% and now?
100%.
100%. So that will form part of this year's audit process for submission to AG?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. When you were speaking about the preparation of the annual financial statements, earlier on, I think it was a question from Honorable Hadeb. You made mention of two things which I'd just like a clarity on. One is the service provider that you've brought in. Am I correct to say that's a consultant? Insofar as the assurance associated with the AFS is concerned?
No, Chair, it's not a consultant. They perform quality assurance. They're not giving us advice. So they work through the documents, compare it with the IFRS, International Financial Standards, look at the supporting documentation, and say correct, fix, enhance, write, etc. They are not there to assess it, hear what we say about it, and then tell us what we knew in any case. No.
But they're a consultant.
No, they're not a consultant. They are working. Consultants come back and give advice. These people aren't advice. They're giving us fix this, write this, etc. So maybe I'm misunderstanding, but no, we don't classify them as a consultant.
So they tell you to fix this. Is that advice or instruction? Why must there be an external assurance service provider
So
to come in, and at what cost are these? Is this service provider present at the SABC?
So it is actually good practice to, at least on a interval basis, generally every 3 years, and for an organization to have an independent third party, then look at the way things are disclosed, its policies, financial policies, the IFRS compliance requirements, etc. Otherwise, it is really just the finance team, the expertise that you have there, as well as your internal audit that engages with it. So we thought it was good practice to, for once, bring that kind of assistance in to just help us do a check. I'm sorry, I can't remember what the tender was awarded for.
So this is in response to the AFS not being prepared consistent with the standard reporting format?
It was an initiative that we actually had going last year already. It wasn't in time for the then audit, so it is an additional enhancement that we thought would add value, yeah.
Right. Are there capacity challenges within the SABC insofar as the preparation of the AFS is concerned?
In the group reporting division, which presides over the compilation of the AFs, no.
So then why would the AG make the comment that the statements were not prepared consistent with the reporting standard?
That was because of the irregular expenditure, which wasn't complete, and it should have been complete. It was because of the consequence management that wasn't complete, and it should have been complete. And it was the 2 PDO items, the predetermined objectives, which should have been reported against, and we couldn't do that. Those were the main ones, yeah.
Right. So you said consequence management moving forward, if things are not done correctly in the preparation of the AFS, there will be consequence management. Has there been consequence management before? Why does it sort of now start now? Not that it shouldn't, but has it been there?
When it is about how the audit findings. So firstly, when the audit findings are, the external audit executes or issues their audit findings, and there's a similar situation where, for example, a supporting schedule is not tied up to the annual financial statements, and there's no integrity issues, it's merely two numbers that should tie up, then there will be consequence management this year. Last year, or the year under review, the then finance department, like the whole organization, was busy adapting to the new target operating model, and we had this nearly 600 vacancies back then. So there was an organizational underlying challenge with capacity, and the adjustment to a team without the colleagues they lost in the Section 189, and then they were in new positions, new scale codes, potentially new salaries. So I give them the benefit of the doubt that that adjustment that they underwent for nearly 6 months of that year at minimum maybe contributed to the situation. This year, there's nothing like that.
Okay, it's fine. We'll assess those AFSs when they come. I'm still this service provider. I think we're gonna want more details and in writing, because ultimately they're a consultant. They come in, fix this, correct that, don't do that. I mean, it will boil down to a matter of terminology and semantics. And at what cost this comes to at the SABC. I simply raise this in the simple context, but expensive one, that municipalities, and I'm sure the AG in releasing the MFMA audit outcomes, there will be another issue around AFSs. And so it seems as if there's a dependence. And last year, they cost about 1.3 billion rands combined throughout the country for all municipalities. So it's just something we take a very dim view on. And so I would think in writing it would be helpful to get the terms of reference, the scope of work, the costs, what skills transfer this does and has for the SABC, and whether it's not creating an external dependency syndrome which seeks to forego building internal capacity, which is fundamentally what should be the primary focus of the SABC. Like I'm saying, municipalities in the last financial year cost about, in total, 1.3 billion rands. And still the audit outcomes were just shambolic, to say the least. And I'm sure that we will not get the update as soon as we leave this meeting, and the picture's very unlikely to have changed. And so you've got consultants or service providers coming in at exorbitant costs, yet the needle is not moving. So I think we would want to gauge that. Honourable Member, on this point, yes, I just want to wrap it up. Okay, Honourable Member, quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Now, I get your guidance, but I would like to hear the understanding of the corporate from the board of this particular service provider. If there is an understanding of who they are, what they do, and how are they assisting, or are their services required there?
CEO, okay. I was being a teeny weeny bit lenient to the chair because yeah, but let's hear his response on the extent to which they are aware of this.
Yeah, no. I was conferring with the chair of ARC because at the board we had not dealt with the matter. So maybe if you want to speak, maybe you should probably speak a little bit about it because they dealt with it. Seems they've dealt with it.
Okay, sure, fair enough.
Yes, Chair and Member, we are aware of the additional assistance and add-on, and wanted to give management an opportunity because it's operations to also test then the stress that they are saying they are undergoing. And if then this for them will give them an opportunity to issue numbers and documentation that is verified in an effective manner, then it will give one comfort in terms of time and delays and focus that we have as audit. Like CFO says, it is practice and also other organizations to look into additional capacity. And for us, I think having this opportunity to have gone through the current unaudited AFS, there were quite a number of previous instances where there were misstatements, as the Chair was alluding to, and also where numbers were not correlating. So when management then alluded to this, we believe that if it's a remedy they require, let us give them an opportunity. So members, I think for us, then we'll be able to test whether this worked for them or is currently not working. Yes.
Honorable Mente.
Then it means we have a problem. If the organization within itself cannot ascertain financial statements at a level where that particular task has to be done, it means there's no capacity there. Don't you think instead of outsourcing this particular service, we should rather, as an SABC, have competent staff that deals especially with looking into the financial statements? Because it's a service that, as you are explaining it, it's a service that you require, and you want it to confirm if you are right. Thus, outsourcing it is not going to help us. It looks like a cleaner. You need the building to be cleaned throughout. You can't have cleaners from elsewhere when you have a building to be cleaned. So do you think it's wise to have this on a tender rather than capacitating SABC to look after its own affairs?
Chair of ARC, I think my difficulty is how you don't want to call it consultants. You see. Yeah, I wanted to come to the GC because who are these people that you have brought in? Who are they? And I'm certain you can pull out the costs associated with them. And for how long are they there? And that's why I was on the issue of scope. And now in Chair of Access, there's been material misstatements that they found, the figures not correlating. Then the service provider, consultant comes in to pick those up and you correct it. Yeah, because you see, if you don't call it consultants, then you don't, you sort of negate then accepting the fact that they are a add-on to the value chain because of capacity deficiencies. CEO?
Thank you, Chair. This is an entity that was brought in to stress test our financial apps or systems. It's a tender that was less than 5 million, and the scope is clearly outlined, and it's a specialized skill that we do not have internally. And what we will do, Chair, we will submit all of the required documents for transparency in this respect.
CEO, CFO, sorry.
I believe the value is about 100,000 rand, Chair. But we will confirm. Thank you.
Yes, I suggest you do 5 million, 100,000. It's fine. Give us the in writing, because I think it's a matter of putting it in its context and what it means to the SABC value chain of assurance. From for everyone. Internal audit, your board level, ARC, everyone, just to understand. I think that's the point we were at. But I think because Chair of ARC, you were still responding, if there's any concluding remark on this, and it's fine. Right, perfect. CFO?
So just because it was really an operational matter, that's why the only number I could, I knew it wasn't above 5 million, because that is when we would have gone on an open tender. So that's where we come from. In the meantime, I managed to get an answer, which is this 100K. But we will submit the specifics. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fair enough. I think, Minister, you know, I think the final point, I keep on going back to this thing in terms of an unfunded public mandate. And I think there has to be due consideration given to what the SABC is expected to do. I don't want to call it, actually let me not name it, because then I'm going to be quoted as having made a proposal and I haven't quite thought it through. But where I'm at is, what are the costs associated or the business plan associated with elections, and whether the budget is available for it? Because it eats at you. So I'm sure you've costed the elections in terms of them being a public mandate. They every 2.5 years, local government, national and provincial, and so the cycle continues. And then I know in another capacity, you fight with the SABC and they say, well, we don't have resources. And then there's another big fight, we don't have capacity. So has that happened, and are the funds available? Have you costed it? And what impact does it have to your normal day-to-day operations? But the fundamental issue is it being costed. Minister?
No. Thanks, Chair. That matter has been dealt with. But the question is, of course, from the entity, I've had some murmurings whether it is enough. All what we have said, because there was an attempt to discuss it in the portfolio committee yesterday, and I said that matter should be handled. That there's an amount of money that Treasury has actually specifically allocated for that. Whether it's enough or not, all what we said to the entity is that critical is a concrete plan. And secondly, the commitment that government cannot waver on is successful election. That's just as a matter of principle.
Fair enough. It's just that ultimately what it must not do is cause or rather set SABC on collision course with its mandate, when they must now come back here to us and we say, yeah, but now you're not performing. And then the default reason at best and default excuse at worst is then they will say elections. So I think there has to be a particular focus and resources made available. I just raised it vis-a-vis the fundamental issue of revenue generation and the limitations that the CEO had raised earlier on. Colleagues, are you fine? All right, let me say, Mr. Chairman specifically, we tend to be nice when we meet boards which are new, to give you the benefit of doubt that you are new. The only difference with yourselves is, of course, you applied. Generally, the other boards are appointed, so you pursued this responsibility. And so it comes with an added expectation on our side that in pursuing it, there is a commitment to turn things around. Those who are appointed, however they are, we don't know, are sort of somewhat different. But you yourselves, you applied. Our expectation is that things need to turn around at the SABC. And the basis of that turnaround is prudent financial management consistent with the law. The SABC is too big a national asset to fail. Given its reach and its strategic positioning insofar as access, including but not limited to language, because the SABC, more than any other entity, transcends the language barriers. So it's a lot of things. But ultimately, what must not happen is an SABC that bleeds the fiscus. Bailouts are not a standard operating procedure for successful businesses. They are not a default position. They are not a norm, they are an exception. They must happen in the worst case scenario. In our view, the SABC has long exceeded its fair share of what we can accept as an exception. Any other bailout now would be an indication to us that the institution has collapsed. So things have to change, and the difficult decisions where necessary must be taken if they will save the institution but at the same time preserve the national mandate. The basis of that change will be reflected in part, and I say in part deliberately, on the audit outcomes. So you've got your work cut out, and I assure you, if things do not change, future engagements will not be as pleasant as today. It's not a threat, it's just that we are fundamentally tired as a committee of things not changing. And we see that there was an interim board at PRASA at some point, and they came here and they thought they were the deputy saviors of some sort, a holier than thou kind of attitude. When they left that meeting, a few hours later they were dissolved. That's where we are now. RAF came here and thought they could roughshod us. The minister's 30 days, I think, is expiring. In fact, soon that board has got to go. We've reached that level of boldness now, where we are not shying away from making recommendations that boards or executives must go if the need arises. I say that to frame our future engagements, that we just have an expectation of nothing more and nothing less, that things have got to change for the better. And so if you do the right thing, what happens is that we become jobless this side. So the only way to get rid of us is to do the right thing. We are the only people in this country saying, fire us. So the colleagues were complaining, they're saying there's too many meetings. I said this because there's too many problems. So I'm just really stating that now to say, yes, there is improvement in certain areas at the SABC, and those are solid foundations enough to build upon and to strengthen your own outlook. But until we have turned that corner, our level of satisfaction is at a minimal, because we don't want to apply a level of degree to say, if you've achieved good here, then no. We want good in total. But the progress is noted, and I can conclude by saying, Mr. Chairman, crack the whip at the SABC. Because one of the key issues in SOEs is that there is an absence of consequence management. So the message is clear for the SABC. Shape up or shape out. So we will look at, Minister, the upcoming audit outcomes, and we will give the board the space and time to also go through the motions. And unless in exceptional circumstances, I think we will meet talk through correspondence and submissions in the interim so that you can have the time to do the work that you need to do. So uninvite yourselves now by doing the right things. We wish you well. I speak on behalf of all the colleagues, and we've got one expectation: things must change. Thank you very much, Minister, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair of ARC, DDG, the executives. Always a pleasure interacting with yourselves. Minister, any concluding remarks on, or let's start with the Chairman of the Board if there's any, and then we'll go to the Minister.
No, thanks, Chair. I think it's also maybe a positive thing that we're having this engagement earlier on in our term of office. We certainly, our commitment and aspiration is that we don't see you again. So I think I speak on behalf of the collective that we embrace the task, we embrace the challenge, and we are here because we believe that the situation can be turned around. If not, we wouldn't be here. So we're committing to advancing the mandate of the SABC, and maybe specifically for the purpose of this committee, financial management, compliance, and good governance. That will be a priority, and fundamentally, of course, the pursuit of that question of financial sustainability for the SABC, and ideally not having to engage on bailouts. But I think, as you have correctly alluded, and the Minister have done so as well, we do have to have frank and honest conversation about universal access, the public service mandate, and how best we find ways of funding it and finding or defining it within the broader funding model of the SABC that is commercially viable whilst not compromising that public service mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister?
No, thank you, Chair. I think a lot of words come from you. What I just wanted to say is that public broadcasting, to me, it's a tool of certainty and peace in society. It's critical in ensuring the predictability of the environment within which different people operate, especially the investor community and so on. It gives the level of clarity which is critical for the minimum national sanity. So it is not a luxury job. It's a job of national interest. So when we are summoned here, we are not being done a favor. It's being done in the interest of the country. We accept that it will not always be an exciting meeting, but I always view the issue of oversight, especially by a parliament, not as a tool of conflict, but as a tool of accountability for effective pursuit of whatever noble goal that the country so depend on. So against those words, we are here. There are only two ways of not seeing you. It's either we do our work or we don't come when you call.
Well, I can. The letter won't help you. Yeah. Well, unless there's a higher calling. All I can say is don't write a book. On that note, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you. I'd also like to thank the SIU as well for being here. They are an effective enabler for this committee and a permanent feature of our work, and they are doing good work. They are ever present. Yeah, they are omnipresent. Thank you very much.